sitting up here.
Oh, okay. I should have known that. That turns us on. Okay, great. How about you start us off with a song?
Okay.
I'm ready.
Since everybody's so scattered out, you're going to have to sing loud if I'm going to start us off with a song. Asking questions and you're singing, so I think he took that to heart. So, when peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my love thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. And Lord, this the day when the faith shall be sight, but clouds may roll back as a scroll. The trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. Good job. Thank you.
Going to get a little personal this morning. We have had 3 funerals for us in the last 3 weeks, all people of great faith who've had tremendous influence on us. Fred and I have worshiped lots of places, and I must say we have never worshiped anywhere before where we've been more welcomed and where there have been more opportunities to participate. You get to be as old as I am, which I don't want to say too much because there are several people older than I, and you've gotten to do a lot of things. The opportunities to participate as you grow older minimize a lot. And for us to be able to be here and to do these things is a tremendous blessing for us. Now, I gave my very first talk when I was 14 years old. We were living in Illinois, and the Church of Christ in Illinois, northern Illinois, was not very strong at all. We had to drive 14 whole miles to go to church, and we met in the YMCA building. Now, growing up in Henderson, I could walk to the church building in about 5 minutes. So for us to drive 14 miles to church, I thought was a real sacrifice. And so as a part of the young men's training class, my dad helped me put together a lesson on the parable of the sower. And I was as nervous as the proverbial long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. It's now all these many years later, and I have still the same anxiety. I want you to think about the skill sets that you have and find a way to make those available here at this congregation. There are things you can do other people either can't or won't. Then 60 years ago, we were invited to come to Morehead State College up in Morehead, Kentucky, eastern Kentucky, Rowan County, 22 counties in that very poor Appalachian coal country. And Dr. Adrian Doran and his wife, Manon, had gone there in 1954 to become president of Morehead State. He had been a political figure, Speaker of the House, in the legislature, and had run for governor and almost had that thing won, and the liquor lobby bought the other opponent. And they needed to get this guy out of the way. He just finished a PhD in higher education, and so they said, we'll put Doran over here in Rowan County in eastern Kentucky, and we won't ever hear from him again. 700 people, 700 students, they were about to lose their accreditation. Well, he brought them to one of the finest regional publics in the Commonwealth over time, and so we were invited to go there to preach. About 80 people in the congregation. They'd started the congregation in 1954. About 80 people in the congregation, more PhDs than I ever spoke to in my life. Now then, here we are talking to lawyers and other people. So I just want to try to express myself that it is a tremendous honor to be able to be part of this congregation and the good work that it does. When I was growing up and we were studying about Gideon and Samson and all those people in the book of Judges, we didn't tell all the stories. I'm going to show you a slide just in a few minutes from the Bible Project that says these guys are not role models. Now, I think I want to take a little exception with that, because if you look at David, who is my favorite Old Testament character, just because of his heart that he would always return to God no matter how awful his sins were, David wasn't a good role model either in the long run. So I have deviated maybe from what my assignment was. There are 4 judges in this first series that we're looking at. But I wanted to provide for us, for me and for you, some things that we didn't have access to, which we didn't have access when we were younger. The internet has brought us a lot of access to immediate information. We might have been able to get it if we knew which book to look in the library, maps and that sort of thing. So I wanted to know, we're talking a lot about Israel today. I wanted to get into perspective what Israel is like in terms of the geography of the United States of America. Well, the research I did said New Jersey is the most likely overlay in terms of space. So we'll look at that. The orientation narrative that we've had the last 2 lessons from both Nelson and from Chip bring us to the point of where we are. And the 3rd chapter begins to tell us about why what's going to happen does happen. And then today I'm going to deviate just a little bit. We're going to talk about these 4 judges and what went before them. And I'm going to take us all the way over to the end of the book of Judges and into the 15th chapter of Samuel, because I want us to see where it's going and what the hope for us is at the bottom line. Ryan talked this morning at length about the book of Ecclesiastes, and he makes a point about eternity. So I want us to look at and think about these things, and then we can go from there. So these are the judges: Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, and Deborah and Barak. Deborah and Barak are linked together. She was a judge sitting between Ramah and Bethel, and that's where she held court, and people would come to her. And so she called when the people had gotten so much pain, God said to her, find somebody, and she calls on Barak. So they do that together. So Othniel and Ehud and Shamgar. Shamgar gets all of 2 verses in the book of Judges. So what I have done is try to find where these judges were in terms of the book of Israel and where the geography was, and from which tribe they worked. Now, when we come to Ehud, we're going to find out that Ehud was left-handed. This is the only time in the Bible it mentions that. And I did a little research. I'm left-handed. When I was in the first grade, they tried to teach me to write right-handed, and now then I can't even write very well left-handed. Tie my hand behind my back. Research says 10% of the people, of the population, are left-handed. Well, in that room, if that's 10% of us, both Nelson Whitfield and I are left-handed. First thing you learn when you go to school, and if you have a notebook, you've got this binder here. Well, most people write going this way. Well, I had to either write with my hand turned around like this, which meant I drug it through either the ink or the pencil. I finally learned to write like that. But in the case of Ehud, to whom we'll get, it was a strategic opportunity for him to bring about what God wanted to happen. So Israel in perspective, if you look here at this, you've got Israel in the blue and New Jersey on the left-hand side. And then the next is a little bit closer of Israel, and what Israel is like in the center is today. You've got the West Bank, and you've got Jordan, and then up to the left, Lebanon is in the headlines now, and that's up in the left-hand corner. And then you got Egypt down here, and then there's the Gaza Strip, which is also in the news. And then on the right-hand side is a slide that I'm using later. To be candid, I couldn't figure out how to get that pane out, and I didn't want to have it empty, so I put this slide in here that we're going to look at later. But you'll see that there's the Dead Sea, and Jerusalem is not far from there. And then you will recall several times in the Bible, it talks about things that happened from Dan to Beersheba. Well, Dan is all the way up in the top, and Beersheba is all the way down here. So that's an all-encompassing statement that says the whole country. So this is, it may be tough to see that. This is a history of Israel, which if it were out on a scroll, would go straight across the page. But I just wanted us to remember that God called Abraham, and then we moved from there. We went down into Egypt, and then they came out of Egypt, and they wandered around in the wilderness, and then God gave them the promised land, but he said, you have to take this land. You must subdue it yourself, and I'm expecting you to do it all. And of course they didn't. There's a slide we'll have a little bit later that shows the cycle of God's people. They would obey God, they'd get fat, dumb, and happy, and then they would fall away. They'd be seduced by their surroundings, and they would sin, and God would deliver them out into punishment. They'd be so punished that they just couldn't bear it anymore. They'd cry out to God, they'd repent. God would have mercy on them. God would bring up a deliverer. And after all the judges are finished, they come to Samuel, who says, Samuel, you're old, and your sons don't follow in your ways. We're tired of you. We want a king. And of course, that was just heartbreaking to Samuel. And God said, buck up. It's not you they're rejecting, it's me. So this is a picture here of where the families, where the tribes of Israel were assigned to go. And we'll have another slide that shows where we're moving today. So the promised land, these tribes were assigned where to live by the Lord when they took the land. And so God commanded them fully to take the land, and that they didn't do that. And so then after Joshua's death, from a lack of clear leadership, the will to follow God's instructions faded. Now, several times throughout the book of Judges, you'll recall, in those days there was no king, and people did what they thought was right, and or what they wanted to. So the Israelites began to make relationships with the inhabitants and even to marry. These marriages resulted in a turning away from God and from following the gods of their mates. So what I have done here is break that previous slide that I had into two, so you can see just a little bit better. So this is the top part of it, and this is the bottom part of it. So the 12 tribes of Israel, you will recall, are the sons of Jacob and his wives. And who were they? Well, they were named after Jacob's children or grandchildren in the case of Ephraim and Manasseh. Each tribe had unique traits that reflected the characteristics and the stories of its founding member. Now, you may not have noticed this, I didn't, but in the narrative, in the biblical narrative, it talks about that left-handedness seemed to be a trait of the tribe of Benjamin. That's about all it says about that, but we'll find a little bit later that the Greeks are reported to have left toddlers who were showing left-handed traits and girls out on the mountains for the wild animals to eat. I mean, people, we think we're barbaric here today, but some of the things that people did in the Old Testament days are just absolutely awful. So we'll take a quick look, just a reminder of the 12 tribes of Israel. The sons, you had Reuben with the oldest, Simeon, Levi descended from sons Jacob and Levi, Judah descended from, now Othniel is from this tribe, and that 40 means that's the number of years of peace they had after his leadership. There was Dan, and there was Naphtali. Deborah and Barak were from that tribe, and there was 40 years of peace with their work. Then Gad was named after Jacob's son Gad. Asher was founded by Jacob's 8th son, and Issachar founded by Jacob's 9th son. And then there was Zebulun, divided into 3 clans in Moses' era. And then there was Joseph, who was Jacob's favorite. And there was Benjamin, who was Jacob's most favorite. And then Ehud was part of the tribe of Benjamin. And after his work, then there were 80 years of peace. Now, Judges are more than just this book, and we'll have a slide over here on the right that points that out. But these are called Judges. The book is named Judges just because there were these people who sat, and that was how leadership was done. So in chapters 3 through 5, we have these 4 people whose names we have mentioned, and then we go from there to others, all through which Chip and Nelson and I will cover for the rest of the quarter. So there's Othniel, there's Ehud, there's Shamgar. Now, all we know about him is he killed 600 Philistines, and he did it with an ox goad. And the research I did said this is the only time in all of the Bible that the term ox goad is mentioned. And I've got a picture of what they think that was like. And then there's Deborah and Barak, and Sisera was the main general of that leadership situation there, and he had 900 chariots of iron. And that made him, without God's help, invincible. He had the nuclear weapon of the region, and nobody else had that, and so they couldn't go up against him. There are 2 or 3 times otherwise when that's mentioned. So this is a listing some scholar made of some of the judges, people who were judges, in terms of the practical matter, who are not mentioned as judges. So you've got Moses and you have Joshua, both of whom were strong leaders. And then you have these here. And then, excuse me, as we were designing our class for this time, we decided that we thought, Nelson and Chip and I thought that the judges go all the way to the appointment of Saul. And though Samuel is questioned as being a judge by some, and then you have Eli, who was Samuel's predecessor. So we included that, and that's why as we come to the ending, I'm moving on over to the book of Samuel. Now, here is the start of the story of the book of Judges. You see the people come in from Egyptian bondage, and they've wandered into 40 years in the wilderness. And so they come in, and God says to them, you take the land, and they're to take the land from the Canaanites. And, oh boy, I have put here we are. I wind up doing this almost every time. So there in chapters 1 and 2, you have the discussions which Nelson and which Chip covered last time. Well, I'm way ahead of myself. All right, maybe I can do this. So what you have here is this cyclical situation that the book of Judges, that the scholars say this happened on five different occasions, but in fact, it goes from Adam and Eve all the way to today with people's behavior. So they sin, God sells them off into oppression, they begin to cry out, God gives them deliverance, they have peace, and then that starts all over again. So the Bible Project people say that you have three sets of judges: pretty good judges, just okay judges, bad and really bad judges. And the things they have to say about Samson are just not positive at all. And so what you have here is a list of Israel's total failure, and then up here you can see some of these other things, and then it comes to the end. So this chart, if you happen to be interested, is available for free online if you just go to the Bible Project. So you have these three judges, and Shamgar is not even included in this group right here. So then we go to the next slide, which is a call out of that, which makes it just a little bit more easy to look at. So an analysis of the Bible Project is these guys, as I mentioned earlier, that they're not role models. So the geography of Judges that we're reviewing today is as this right here. So up in the top you have, this is the location where Shamgar did his work. This is Othniel right here, and then here is Ehud and his work, and Deborah and her work. And the places in which they worked. So chapter 3 introduction summarizes what we've had in the first two chapters. Now these are the nations that the Lord left to test Israel by them, and that is all in Israel who had not expected all the wars in Canaan. It was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. And I have made this note right here. Some of us are old enough to remember World War II. I can remember my dad's being drafted, getting a telegram from the President of the United States, greetings, it said. And I can remember driving him from Henderson out to Highway 100 to a place called Snow White, where Highway 18 went down to Corinth, put him on a bus, took him down there to that, and he and 8 other people from Henderson got on a train. Southern Railway went all the way to Williamsburg, Virginia, to a place called Camp Peary, and that's where he had his basic training. And then he came home for a week before he was sent to Biloxi, Mississippi, for quartermaster school. Well, he comes home, and we have a week there, and we're sitting Sunday afternoon at the table, and he had to be on a train going back to Biloxi, and there was a train. GM&O had a train. Gulf Mobile and Ohio Railroad had a little 2-car train we called Doodlebug, a gas-powered locomotive, and it had a passenger car and a baggage car. And we're sitting at the table, and we hear that car coming. You hear it tooting its whistle. And we jumped up, Grandpa drove us down to the station just as this thing's pulling out. Well, if Dad doesn't show up when he's supposed to, he's considered to be AWOL, and in those days, they shot people for that. So we jumped in the car, and we raced that train all the way down Highway 45 to Selmer, and got there before the little car did, and Dad got on. So he was there for a while. My mother would take me down to Meridian, Mississippi. Dad would come up on weekends, and we'd get to stay there. We stayed in a hotel up on the second or third floor, and there was a statue of a Confederate soldier there, standing up about the height of that, and I called him the man upstairs. My point about all this is, and there is a book I came in contact with yesterday by a Marine who had fought on Peleliu and in Okinawa, and he'd made notes on little slips of paper and kept it in his New Testament, and he wrote a book about that afterwards and just described all the terrible things that happened. Our soldiers came home and became what Tom Brokaw said is the greatest generation. Now, some of you here have served in the military. Some of you here have served in intelligence work, and you have served overseas, and you know the terrible things that can happen. You may have experienced them, you've seen them. If you don't, you've read reports about them from the work that you have done. We have gone pretty much for a long time without any direct conflict, and people have lost and forgotten what it's like. There was a long time after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor until the Battle of Midway, if you studied World War II, until there was question every day as to whether we could survive. It was not a known quantity, and the Japanese were winning every time. We were just caught off guard. And I can remember rationing. We had little books, little tags in them, and we could take those down to the store, and we could only get so much. Gasoline was rationed, tires were rationed, and the only people who could drive over 30 miles were preachers. My grandfather was a preacher in West Tennessee, and he could drive to preach. Foodstuffs were limited. It was dire circumstances. Now, not as bad as situation through which I did not live, which was a depression, but it was tough. We had little red coins and little blue coins. They were stamped out of plywood, and that was how we were able to manage. We had what we call victory gardens. My grandmother and my grandfather had a garden, and we had vegetables, and we had a cow, and we had milk, and we had chickens, and so we had eggs, and we had some pigs, and so we had bacon. Young people today ain't got no clue. Forgive my butchering of the English language here, but none of those hardships have come. There was a B-17 training base at Halls, Tennessee, which is where Dyersburg is now. That tarmac of that is still there. And I would go out in the yard and play, and I could hear planes coming, and I could look up in the sky, and I could see from this perspective to this perspective, planes flying, three in a formation just like that, all across, and you could hear them. Well, those were B-17s, and they were practicing. One of the people who was a member of our governing board at Northeastern Christian, she grew up in Rutherford, and she married a pilot who was killed in a training operation, and she wound up, because of her, she was just 19, because of her grief, she had a job at the drugstore. She had a job in a clothing manufacturing plant, and then in the evening she took up tickets at the movie theater. And I said, Nell, that had to be daunting. Weren't you just absolutely worn out? And she said, John, that was the point. I was so heartbroken and so grieved and so fearful for our country. I wanted to be so worn out at the end of the day that I couldn't lift my head. So my point in telling you these stories is we today do not know what those of us who are older experienced on the home front. And because of that, like these people, you see, the text here says it was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, teach war to those who had not known it before. And in my opinion, and I'm getting into politics here, but in my opinion, because we have not had that. We've had all these years of peace and all these years of prosperity. Our younger generation of people have no clue. They don't understand what those hardships can be. So that's my comparison, trying to build what it was like for the people of Israel. So there was testing after Joshua, and that says they were there for the testing of Israel to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, and which he commanded them of their fathers by the hand of Moses. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Perizzites. So, test results. I don't know how it was for you, but I was such a marginal student that I was always anxious every time we had a test at school, and I wanted to be sure that I was among the first to get my paper back. Well, here's the test results that God had given to them. And their daughters they took for themselves for wives. Now he's talking about, the text is talking about the daughters of the permanent residents of Canaan. And they took to themselves wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods. So the practical result of that is, in worshiping the Canaanite deities, the Israelites exchanged the worship of the living God for the service of wood and stone. The lofty theology, austere morality, and abstract worship of Yahweh was replaced with tangible, exciting fertility religion. Now, both Nelson and Chip and Joel Boone and Ryan Pitts all have talked about this god Baal, which I grew up calling it Baal, and the Ashtaroth, which is the female counterpart. And these are fertility. Now, fertility for them generally was sex, but also fertility had to do with the land and its productivity. And of course, they didn't know all that much about fertilizer, and they were agricultural people in those days, were at the vagaries of the weather. Today, if you fly on a plane across the nation and you look down, you'll see these great big circles that are 2 or 3 miles apart. There'll be a whole bunch of them. What that is people are irrigating. They've turned our desert part of the country into fertile ground. Well, they didn't have any of those opportunities. And so the opportunity to see a God and to worship something that was visible to them, and the opportunities to be part of what the community was, trumped the living God. So Shamgar judged through 1212 BC. We haven't been able to establish exactly when it was he started. But Shamgar, and I have colored these people's names that because they're judges, he was championed the cause of God by killing 600 Philistines with nothing more than an ox goad, verse 1:31. The Bible, unfortunately, is silent about who Shamgar was, who his parents were, what tribe he came from. It also does not state how long he was a judge. Now, his service west of the Jordan may have overlapped with that of Ehud, who served Israel in most regions of territory across the Jordan. So here are a couple of images of an ox goad, the only time scholars tell us that this is mentioned in the Bible. If you were a cow and you were punched with that, you'd respond pretty quickly, I would think. We had things we used to move cows along, and when I was growing up, but nothing like that. And then this is a line drawing of that. And then we use the etymology of this word goad means we're trying to move somebody into some set of behavior, and it generally is considered to be oppressive or attached with it some anger or frustration. Tried to get you to do this, you're not doing what I want you to do, I'm going to apply some kind of pressure. This slide I considered taking out, but I thought maybe it would be worth leaving in just to show that this is the list of the judges and the order in which they operated and where they came from. And the first judges that we have listed is that I told you I couldn't write. Well, I can't draw straight lines either. You see that little purple bracket up there is to where what we're studying today. So next we come to Othniel. Othniel, the children of Israel were oppressed for 8 years under his leadership. Othniel is the son of Kenaz, who's Caleb's younger brother. Well, that was an important thing for me to learn because I didn't remember that Caleb had other brothers. But if we dig ourselves deeply into the Pentateuch and support that with something like Zondervan's Architectural Study Bible or some other kinds of things like this, which have brought to us research that documents from archaeology things that the Bible says, it gives us a nice platform on which for our studies to operate. So the Spirit of the Lord came on Othniel. I would absolutely love to know how God communicated with these people. Moses, you will recall, when he was called by God up on Mount Sinai, said, I want to see your face. And God said, you can't do that. You can't do that. You will die if you see the brilliance of my glory. But I will pass by and let you see my shadow. So I'm eager to know when we get to the eternal city, how did God speak to Othniel? Othniel went to war. The Lord's Spirit enabled him to overpower the enemy, and there was peace until 40 years, and Othniel died. Then, again, in the sight of the Lord, text says, again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he brought somebody else upon them. So, people did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, what would happen with these countries that would take over, all these regional kings? You will recall last week that Chip mentioned there were 5 kings that sort of banded themselves together to prevent the Israelites from taking over. So what would happen is these kings would take over and they would make forced labor out of the people who were their I was going to say prisoners, but they didn't move them. They were just, and they also make tribute. You'll recall when you get to Midian that Gideon is threshing in a wine press because the Midianites come along and take all of their proceeds, all of their props for themselves. There's nothing left for the people to eat. And so Gideon is threshing in a wine press because he's hidden from them. And so that's how he manages to do that. So vassals, the Israelites were a vassal state to Eglon, the king of Moab, for 18 years. You'll recall these people were tent dwellers in large measure, but Eglon, you'll see that the text says he was an extremely fat man, and he didn't care for tents. He lived in what was called the City of Palms, which was near where Jericho used to be. And so it comes time for a tribute to be brought to him, which is all this money. And so they called Ehud up, and Ehud goes with a procession. He's got all this money and these gifts and all that to go to Eglon. And so they get there and they make the presentation, and Ehud says to Eglon the king, I have a private message for you from God. Well, Eglon perks up and he says, everybody leave us, go away, closes the door in this. There's some discussion among the scholars about what this cool place was. You see, Jericho is not that far from the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is 1,300 feet below sea level, and it's just about hottest place on earth, something like our parts in the west of our country. And so he had enough money to have built for himself a place that was cool. And so you send everybody away, and Ehud says, I've got this message from God. Eglon preferred dwelling in tents. We talked about left-handedness. We talked about that. So he delivered this and said, I have a private message from God. Now, the discussion was that Ehud was left-handed, and so he would strap his sword on the right-hand side, which would be put people off because almost all soldiers were right-handed, and so they would strap their sword over on this side. The text says that he made for himself a sword, and the Hebrew language talks about it being a two-edged sword with a blade rather than a serrated sword, which they use for hacking. We'll talk a little bit later about Samuel hacking Agag to pieces at the end. So his sword was designed to be able to thrust and make a deep impression. So this is an artist rendition of that. You see there in this place here. And so when Ehud says, I have a message from God, the text says that Eglon stood up. And so then he stabbed him. And now there is controversy about how long this sword was. It said it was a cubit. Well, a cubit is generally considered to be 18 inches. And he said he stuck it in him so far, and he was so fat that the hilt of it was covered up. Nobody could see that. And he sends him away. He has a private audience. He stabs Eglon. It goes on to be so graphic as to say that his, of course, a shock like this would make that happen. That his bowels released, unlocks the doors and escapes. Now I kept wondering. This is the Iron Age here. This is how do we have locks? So I did some research about that and have something to show there as well. So he unlocks the doors and escapes, and he arrives at his destination, and he blows the shofar. Now, a shofar is a ram's horn. Most of the time, they're sort of cyclical like that. Sometimes they're a little bit shorter, but that was used for the purpose of calling people to fight. And so he blows the horn and says, follow me. And they killed 10,000 Moabites. And the text says, nobody escaped. Peace 80 years. So this is a drawing of a lock from the 700 BC. And so you could see he had the key there. He had to stick his hand through the inside. And that would lift that up, and the bolt could be moved. I'm running short. So after Ehud dies, there's peace for 80 years. Israel did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. The king of Canaan, next oppressor. Sisera is the chief. He's the one with the 900 iron chariots. Deborah is the prophetess, and she has her headquarters between Bethel and Ramah, and she sent for Barak, Naphtali tribe, to gather up 10,000 men and go to Mount Tabor. And I'll send Sisera out and give you the battle. Well, that's a drawing that I showed you before of where that was going to happen. Barak is a little hesitant to buy in, and so she says, he says, I want you to go with me. And she said, well, yeah, that'll be good. I'll go with you, but it's going to be a price, and you won't get the glory for the victory of this, because the victory is going to come at the hands of a woman, which in those days was pretty big stuff. So the battle is gauged. Barak wins. Not a man is left. Sisera escapes. He goes to the tent of Jael, who is the wife of one of the leaders in the area, and he says, I'm weary, I'm tired. He covers her up with she covers him up with a blanket, gives him something. He goes to sleep, and she drives a tent peg through his temple. Now, that's pretty gruesome, folks. So there's a lengthy song of Deborah about most of the rest of the chapter. The summary of that is praise to God, praise to the commanders, praise to the tribes of Ephraim, rebuke the tribes that didn't help, praise for Jael. I'm moving fast because I want to get to this part with Samuel. So Samuel anoints Saul to be the king at God's instructions. And the very first set of verses in that chapter are Saul just keeps on making missteps. and we get down to the 15th chapter, and we've already been assigned to go down and utterly destroy the Amalekites. Samuel arose early in the morning to meet Saul. It was Saul, Saul. Samuel came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, and turned and passed on and went down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul and said, Saul said, blessed be the Lord, I performed the commandment of the Lord. And Samuel says, yeah, well, what about the sheep and the lowing of the oxen? And Saul said, well, they, talking about the people, have taken them for the Amalekites, and so I made sacrifice. And Samuel says, well, behold, is to obey better than sacrifice. And Saul's giving all this stuff, and Samuel said, look, just stop. That's enough. I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. So then Samuel said, bring here Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And Agag came and cheerfully said, surely the bitterness of death is past. See, Saul was supposed to kill all the people and the king and all the animals and all the spoils not to take. And Samuel says, as your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Now let that sink in. Hacked to pieces. So the issue for us, this is what I want to get to. The issue for us in characters, Saul's root flaw is self-exaltation and self-deception. He thinks he knows better than anyone else, including God. The biggest tragedy is that he's not even aware of it. Story shows that he is completely blind to his arrogance and has always believed he's right. In the final analysis, our deepest character flaws don't have to define us or to be the end of the story, not when it comes to God revealed through Jesus on the cross. That's it. All of these things that we're seeing, all of these things that we're studying, redemption is ours, as mentioned so powerfully and so forcefully by Ryan this morning, if we obey God. We're dismissed.